Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ipatios Moisiadis, and this is another episode of Cleantech Geek. Today, I have the pleasure to have with me Mr. John Davies, who is the founder and CEO of 2 Degrees Kelvin. John, welcome to Cleantech Geek.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So today, with John, we're going to keep on the series of discussions we've initiated very recently. And we're going to discuss about the current situation of solar in the UK. We're going to discuss about the situation with COVID-19 and what this presents for the businesses, small and big. And we're also going to dive a bit into the CFDs and subsidies and also the data, which is always a very relevant topic, John.
Absolutely.
So to kick off our discussion, before we dive into the questions, it would be really good to have a bit of background from you. I think you are coming, despite the fact that you have many years of experience in the industry, you've decided very recently to make your jump and start your own company. And here in Cleantech Geek, we are committed in engaging interesting companies. Doesn't matter really if they are big or small. So it would be extremely good to introduce yourself, to give us a bit of background about 2 Degrees Kelvin.
Great. Yeah. So thanks again for having me. I think I'll start a little bit with my background. I grew up in Pembrokeshire, in southwest Wales, around the oil and gas refineries and terminals down there. My father had a construction company down there, so I very much come from the fossil fuel side from an early age. Studied mechanical engineering and then started in the coal-fired sector, where I worked for several years, making my way up to station manager at the coal-fired power station. So very much come from the black side, from fossil fuels. Then
from the dark side of the force.
From the dark side, yeah, absolutely. And then moved through energy from waste and biomass type roles and projects, which I really enjoyed, before finding my passion in renewables, and in particular solar and energy storage over the last few years. So I worked for Cobalt Energy for the last 7 years and started up their solar and energy storage division. And we did a lot of O&M and got into more advanced specialist testing and things like that. So that's where my background is the last several years. An opportunity came up last year for me to start my own business. And I think I'd always been around my father's entrepreneurial side for, I suppose, 25 years or so now. I always knew in the back of my mind I'd like to start and do my own thing, but it always comes down to timing. And I think there was an opportunity early last year for me to step away from Cobalt and to take some of it with me to a certain extent, but to reinvent a new business, which was 2 Degrees Kelvin. So 2 Degrees Kelvin is a climate change engineering startup. We specialize in solar assessments, testing and optimization. We have developed 2 or 3 really strong technology partnerships to deploy technology and sort of system testing and analytical engineering on solar farms to maximize performance and longevity and of course information and knowledge for our clients. So we're also a climate neutral business as well. Mm-hmm. So we thought, being a climate change engineering business, we better kick off as we mean to go on, and we offset any unavoidable carbon through an official offset project, and ours is in Namibia, which is a solar farm. So that's a really nice thing to do as well. Mm-hmm. And with the solar side, that's something that we're very focused on at the moment, but we do have ambitions to open up into other climate change mitigation related product services solutions in the future. So that's our grand plans.
Excellent. So you've took the decision to incorporate the company. what was your, the inner force that drive you forward, if you would like? I mean, you said that you found your passion in renewables. Why do you think this happened? Why was renewables your calling, in a sense?
I think growing up with the journey I've been on, being exposed to oil and gas down in Pembrokeshire. I think I was 17 when the CM Press oil disaster happened, and saw the devastation that happened down there on that coastline. And being surrounded by my father's multiple businesses, I'm working from quite a young age, in every holiday and what have you. I always had quite a strong work ethic, but it's only really the last 5 to 10 years where I've started to think, well, I could actually do this on my own, and I'd like to start expanding my thoughts and ambitions into other things. I really enjoyed the solar sector, and for all of the positive reasons of the environmental benefits and things like that, and the technology that really has sort of swollen inside me, I suppose, to give me that driving force that we need to do something positive for climate change. And renewables, the mass deployment of renewables and the slowdown of fossil fuels is part of that. So that's manifested itself in the concept of my new business, and I must admit it's been a bit of a roller coaster the last 12 months. I've enjoyed immensely the creative side of it, and I'm presenting something that's of my own making.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been some really tough times and difficult learning points that I'm sure every new business owner goes through. But yeah, it's had its ups and downs. But we're a month out from being a year old, so we're almost there. And we faced back-to-back storms and a pandemic and all the rest of it. So if we can just get through these last couple of months, we've made the 12-month target, and we've done quite well.
So let's hope you're going to celebrate your birthday in a month's time with the lockdown over.
Absolutely, that would be fantastic.
So just for the viewers' benefit, we're filming this while in lockdown in the UK, and we have no further indication of when the restrictions will be lifted, hopefully in the next 2-3 weeks. Usually, as in other videos, we're doing this in a more intimate environment. We have these discussions with our guests in a more intimate environment, but now we resolve to the help of technology to connect with people which are further afar. So John, you have an extensive experience in the O&M, in solar plants. You've been, you have hands-on experience as an engineer. You've walked, hundreds of plants, not only in the UK but abroad as well. What do you think are the most common failures and mistakes that the industry did when they were developing and constructing the assets? And we have to say here that most of the assets in the UK were constructed under a subsidy regime, one way or another.
Absolutely, I think it's important to recognise first of all that we did a great thing in what we now call the solar boom in the UK. To deploy 9 gigawatts of ground mount solar is a fantastic feat, and we are leading the world. We're certainly up there in terms of our deployment and utilisation of renewables. So that's something we should be proud of. I think, and I've been accused a little bit of scaremongering in some times, but I'm really only trying to make people aware of our findings. With like you said, having experience of visiting over 100 sites and carrying out multidisciplinary site assessments, we're finding some quite sobering things out there. Now, it's not every site, but what we're generally seeing is that there was this, to start with, there was this this cyclic annual routine that we got into, where we cram all of these new developments in before the March 31st deadline. And of course, what that meant was that the bulk of the construction of new sites was done in the UK winter. What we do see, because we specialise in solar panel testing in particular, with mobile testing and in situ electroluminescence, we are seeing a lot of damage out there, which is more than likely caused by the way that these modules were handled.
Mm-hmm.
There's a technology window, if you like, 2011 to 2016, where the modules, there were some savings in time and materials and cost to get them to market as soon as possible. And what that inherently put into our fleet is modules that was more susceptible to mechanical damage than more modern modules manufactured in the last 2 or 3 years, for example. So we are seeing sites with widespread mechanical damage, and that has to have been implemented and put into these sites during the construction phase. So,
but if this is the case, John, and sorry to jump in, how could the advisors, the technical advisors at the time, or even the asset owners, they haven't picked up this kind of actual visual damage, structural damage that you can see perhaps in the structures as well as the panels, as you say?
Yeah, but very seldom is it visible. Micro cracks and macro cracks, which develop into production or power loss areas within cells. If you have a brand new panel and you smash it, if you punch it, for example, you don't shatter the glass, but you fracture the silicon wafers and cells themselves, they might not necessarily be losing production for 2 or 3 more years, because these microfractures have to make their way down vertically to start with, and then as they're stressed thermally and with physical stresses like wind and snow and what have you, the cracks widen and cycle over time until the adjoining grid fingers actually break. And it's only at that stage where the current cannot jump across that you have these dark areas that you see on in manuals and on Instagram stories and things, not Instagram, on LinkedIn rather, where you have these dark areas of cells which are isolated from power loss. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't see them. And I think there's probably an element of naivety in the early days where you're genuinely trying to get the best price. And without blaming the EPCs were generally trying to do a good job and to use good value labour and to get them in as soon as possible. I mean, some of these sites were being thrown in literally within a 6-week period, multi-megawatt sites. And I don't think things have changed, and even new builds that we've been involved with in the last 2 years, there is a shift in the intelligence of the owner, the asset managers that are sometimes getting involved with construction, and the TAs that they're bringing on board. There's definitely a maturity there and an awareness. If you mishandle these things, there will be damage, and it'll start to affect the production of the site some years down the line.
So you think that based on what you're saying, that as an industry we've matured and we've learned from the lessons of the past, mistakes that we did on the development of the sites or during the planning stage or during the construction stage, and now we are much more aware of how things work and perhaps what the best practices are to build these sites properly.
Yeah, for sure. It's evident in the uptake in module quality services, for example. So not only are people getting involved heavily at the manufacturing stage, but they're following those through the whole chain right through to installation. So you're having testing when they come off the ship and arrive on site, and you're having testing in situ as well. And the reason you're doing that is because you're for quite a modest percentage of your EPC cost, you are reducing the risk significantly. You're not only positively affecting the power class of module that you're getting, because the module manufacturer wants to present their best work to you, but you're making sure that the asset, or the modules at least, are in tip-top condition from day one of operation, which is fantastic. That's what you want, and that's what you need really if you want a site to last 25 years plus.
Yeah, and picking that point, I think we've seen now forecasts and models, and we, as managers or investors, or I think we are predicting lifespans of these assets to be between 30 to 40 years. So when we do our forecasting and our calculations, we need to have a different sort of mentality and a different handling of how we perceive the operational expenditure, and how we build and what kind of capex we're going to have has a direct effect on what kind of opex you're going to have throughout these 40 years of lifespan. I mean, do you see this kind of maturity on the investment side, on the forecasting side, that now, as you say, perhaps people are calling you much earlier in the process and say, this is what we want to build. How can we optimize the operational expenditure and the operational costs moving forward?
I think, like I said before, there is definitely an uptake in more proactive quality assurance services, and that includes the on-site module testing and factory acceptance tests for not only modules but for inverters and HV equipment and the like. I think there's definitely a trend towards utilizing the technology that's out there now. So not just putting the standard in, but I'm sure you're aware of a leading company in the UK that's utilizing bifacial solar panels, for example, with trackers and dual site position battery storage as well. So
yeah, you're talking about GridServe, which we had the pleasure of having Mark Henderson here with us in the previous series.
So they're maximizing the value, not only the value, but the throughput and the reliability and the quality of their asset through the selection process of not only design, but the components, the materials they're using, and I'm sure that the subcontractors they're using also. So that's definitely coming through. And I think I'd also advise, one thing that I've seen in the field a lot, and it may have something to do with the huge amount of rain we've had over the last few years, but there's an alarming amount of sites that for multiple months a year are at least ankle deep in water, if not worse. I'm familiar with the development process and them going through the flood risk assessment, and it's a little bit of a tick box exercise. Yeah, you've done that, on you go, you've got planning. But the reality is that you're exposing yourselves to liability there. You can't get to your sites to maintain them, and when you want to go on to sell that site, it's that hidden liability. So I definitely recommend that there's a bit more focus on that. Your options for site selection are going to reduce significantly, and that's obviously down to the connection situation. But not only that, whether there's private wire opportunities as well. So there's a lot of focus needed, I think, on actually pinpointing those sites. It's not just as simple as finding a farmer who's got some nice flattish south-facing land with a grid connection 100 yards down the road anymore. There's a lot more to it if you want it to be a sustainably profitable, subsidy-free asset for 40 years.
You've touched on another point here. I mean, it's a very kind of sensitive point that divides a lot of people, but I think it's worthwhile, discussing it. And I'm talking about the reintroduction of CFDs in the UK. And just to give you my my peace of mind, I think that, and I know this is perhaps a very kind of divisive matter between us in the industry, is that I am a true believer that given the levels of LCOE that we've reached, and the fact that we had and we have sites that they started the construction in the unsubsidized era, as we say. I think it is extremely sad to see that the government is taking a money side decision to bring in back subsidies where, in my humble opinion, they create a bit of market imbalance. And I think that there are many more actions that the government can do to help the further deployment of renewable energy, both in onshore wind and in solar, for example, in planning, in environmental conditions, in the design and the management of the grid and the grid connection options, and many others. So what is your take on that? What is your opinion?
I think anyone who was involved in the boom was extremely grateful for that really positive period, and you know, a lot of companies became incredibly wealthy and did very well out of that period. And I was disappointed, I suppose, when the ROCs reduced.
We all
like
were.
I was with whenever subsidies are reduced, it's just a natural reaction. But I think now that I've come to terms with why they did that, and that it got to a point, like you said, where it didn't actually need subsidies, and there was a cliff drop in terms of new construction, all the rest of it. But it has started to come back up at a much slower, sustainable pace. And it proves that it can be done, and with component and material prices coming down, I think that it's much more sensible now that we've proved that we can do it without subsidies, that we stay on that track. And like you said, there are other things that the government can do. They can make it much easier for us to carry out private wire arrangements, for us to you know, the connections. There's a real sort of tight spot for us at the moment in the large scale solar industry, and faster regulation as well, and pushing these things through. So there's much wider support there. It doesn't necessarily need to be, right, here's some more subsidies. And how you're going to decide, is it just the big lumpy solar farms, solar projects that get the CFDs in the auctions? You know, what else are they going to throw into it? So and the other thing, just to touch on, is, you know, in the peak of the boom, there was a lot of people, multiple layers of froth, and everyone was making great money, and that's great, but it's unsustainable. So I think from a development perspective, it does need to come more in line, and more of an integrated development through to operational management, so that it's done correctly, and that people look after the pennies, and there aren't multiple markups on every stage of the process.
Absolutely, I think we totally agree, and I think we need to understand that whenever you have a market imbalance, then straight away you're losing the fundamentals of how economics work with supply and demand. So development should follow demand. If you have demand, then you will have regulated prices, and you will have sustainable and normal profit margins. I remember back in the day, we were making, not just us, but everybody was making a killing on the development side. It was just prices that were not sustainable. But all of that was driven by the subsidies. And even the panel manufacturers, the inverter manufacturers, they were not pricing their products based on, you know, cost plus, but they were pricing the products based on the expectation of return from a fund, which in the boom, as you say, could be low 2 digits, high 1 digit, maybe. So they were calculating, you know, what kind of price they could put in order to make the financial model work. And I think if you reintroduce subsidies now, then you're losing that kind of normalization that we had after the massive cliff drop that you've mentioned. which was 2016, I guess, 2015, 2016, with the demise of the rocks. Moving to another subject, which is again very kind of sensitive, if you would like, especially in our industry, in the services industry. We've seen, and we had various discussions in public forums, in events, in conferences, and I personally expressed many times my opinion on the matter. But over the past 4 years now, we are still discussing, about prices, and prices in services are not sustainable, and we see companies that they go out of the sector because they cannot compete on price, and I'm still wondering why this is, and why are we perhaps still self cannibalizing. And perhaps it would be very interesting to hear your opinion. What do you think would be the switch where it will stop us competing on price and we will start competing perhaps on value?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And we came into the solar O&M business in 2012-13, and we almost inherited European norms. The dizzy heights of 10 or 12 thousand pound per megawatt per year for O&M, for full scope O&M, and that didn't take long to halve. And in recent years, it's almost halved again. So it's really down in the low thousands. But I think I can remember speaking to you probably 3 years ago, something like that, Eupatius, and you suggesting that this is what will happen. It will consolidate. There will be 6 or 7 main players, and then everyone else will just be, either out, or they will be on the peripheral and they will be supporting the 6 or 7. And that's exactly what's happened. And what you need now to bring to the game, if you're going to win a multi-site tender, is you need to be bankable. You need to have sophisticated data analytics and reporting systems. You need to have a very smart and effective way to manage your workforce throughout the UK, which is notoriously hard to get to all of the nooks and crannies via road. If you don't have all of those, then you're inefficient. There are a small number of those still active, but I would predict that they may well be just one side of a consolidated company. So they would be the cost center for a fund's delivery on operations. The true play O&Ms are having to really move and shift to get themselves efficient. So there is an element of self-cannibalization. Cobalt Energy is a good example. We strategically moved away from O&M because we could not break through the tier 2 O&M. So we were subcontracting to EPCs during the pack to fact period, but we tried for 3 or 4 years, probably longer than we should have, to break through and to get that direct contract with an asset owner.
Mm-hmm. I observe a small shift in the business models, but also there is, I think, on the services, especially third-party services, companies like us, where we sit in the middle, perhaps, you have 2 ways of pressure. You have the pressure from your peers, from your competition, which is other companies that they offer the same sort of services. And then you have the pressure from larger asset owners, IPPs, that they internalize a lot of the services that traditionally you would find on a third-party asset management company or an O&M company or any other specialized services company. So we have 2 essentially forces that they attack the pure service industry, or they take parts of that. However, very recently we've seen models. For example, we've seen discussions, and I've seen some practical examples on contracts and companies that they have started separating these all-inclusive, umbrella type contracts, and they separate them in electrical and non-electrical services, where again they can reduce the fat and you know, the cost plus margins that a lot of this kind of all-inclusive contracts have.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen players that they've decided to take a more drastic action and go and start building their own spare parts and start building their own logistics and warehousing facilities. So we've seen a lot of innovation on business modeling in the sector, and I think this is in one hand good, but on the other hand, I think we are reaching that point where you're going to have the 3, the 4, the 5, if that they're going to be dominating not just in the UK market, but perhaps there will be larger international players. And I think the next level of consolidation is going to be between having one service provider, which is you will have an asset management and an O&M company as a service provider. I think, you know, it's a bit radical perhaps for the moment, but looking at other industries like you know, the real estate and the facilities management, I think this is where we go. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think they're the ones that are going to survive, and you wouldn't start off with a O&M plus asset management company now with
No.
no assets under your wing. You do need that position in the market or something to have a step up on. I think things are going to shift now. We've just moved through the average or the mean age for the UK fleet is around 5 years now. And looking at more mature markets like Germany and Spain, the 7 to 12 year mark is, you know, and they've got slightly younger technology, but it's similar vintage to what the early stuff that we put in. You're going to start seeing sites creak. And if O&Ms aren't clear on the liabilities on the back end, we've already seen in the UK some O&Ms paying huge amounts of liabilities for availability shortfalls. If you haven't positioned yourself well there with perhaps just clean, slightly less risk service provision, and if you want some extras, it's on top, you're going to be vulnerable unless you've got enough scale that it, you know, the good balances the bad. So I think there's going to be some real testing times. Now we can break through that 10-year period. We've got a lot of inverters that are going to need changing out. Got a lot of dodgy HV equipment out there. Modules are deteriorating, and I know I'm a scaremonger on this side, but they really are. And technology has moved on so fast in the last few years. It's less of an issue now, but there's a vintage in there, particularly in the UK, that are going to see you know, lots of interesting challenges over the next few years. Lots of opportunities for revamping and repowering, and, you know, shifting from a 25-year design to a 40-year design. How are you going to do that? So, and that's really what I'm passionate about and interested in. That's why I want to position 2 Degrees Kelvin to be a specialist in providing asset owners with the knowledge that they're in an informed position to make investment decisions moving forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excellent. We've touched on asset optimization. We've touched on revamping, but I think all of this starts with data gathering, and there is also another big discussion in the sector about digitalisation and data analytics. Naturally, you would expect that we use all of this kind of, you know, information and data to take informed decisions. However, I see a bit of a, you know, I see a bit of a paradox here. On one hand, this is where we want to go and this is what we want to do, but on the other hand, I don't have many examples in the industry where we have validated data sets. And I think this starts with the sensors. It starts with how we treat data from the field. So you've been in the field, you've done hundreds of checks. So what is your opinion? Are we having the right sort of kit in the field, either on the data loggers or modems? Are they secure enough? We had a very intuitive discussion with Andrew Eisenberg from Green IT about cybersecurity, and I was surprised to see that the situation was pretty much the same in the States as it is in Europe, which is we haven't ever figured out cybersecurity yet, in a sense, in our parks. But also the sensors. We're not calibrating the sensors, we're not servicing them correctly. So what do you see? What is your practical field experience on the matter?
Yeah, I think even in the sort of early days of the boom, only going back a few years, the big one was the pyranometers, right? And that really is the crux of what everyone's being paid on. It's the sunshine enables you to calculate those PRs, and if that's not being done properly, or there's no validation, so everyone just assumes that they sit there, they're an expensive bit of kit, and they're just, I wouldn't say purring away, they sit there silent, but they work. And as long as you do your calibration, that's absolutely fine. No questions asked whatsoever. We explored an on-site calibration service at one stage, but the equipment needed for that, the practicality of bouncing around 30 grand in the back of your van, the sensitivity of that equipment, it just wasn't practical. Mm-hmm. So I mean, there's the normal stuff, isn't there, for O&M, just to make sure that they're cleaned regularly and their position is verified. But you've also got we've got some equipment, for example, where you can install a side-by-side pyranometer. We've got two different pyranometers, and we put them to mimic almost a clone, if you like, of the ones that are in situ. And we can run parallel data capture on a logger, and then we can look whether there's any discrepancies. And then that would give you validation of the data, or a means to say, oh, we need some new pyranometers here, or this old data is not right, or it's corrupt. Mm-hmm. I think some of the more sophisticated software systems that are boasting, machine learning and AI and all of these sorts of things, it does come down to garbage in, garbage out. That's, unfortunately, if you're just going to do things on a desk with a software system, the stuff on site, the actual capture of the voltages and the temperatures and whatever it may be, it needs to be bang on, and that includes all of the data comms side as well. So, yeah, I think for us on the digitalisation side, what's important, because we're not an O&M or an asset manager, so we haven't had to necessarily deploy these data analytics software packages now. What we're doing is we're capturing physical data, but real data on site. So whether that be test results, images, electroluminescence, graphs, whatever those things, they're physical things that allow you to make decisions or to ultimately understand the true operational condition of the site. Traditionally, they've been, going back several years, they've been in paper copy, then obviously the infamous PDF. But the problem is with that is that they just go into someone's folder on their desktop somewhere, and they often get misplaced and go with people as they leave companies, and it's difficult, particularly if you're looking at site-wide data. If you're looking at 20,000 images on a site, it's just not a PDF solution. So Absolutely. We're working with industry leaders in this, who you know very well, Will Hitchcock and his team at Above, to work with them on their digital twin platform, where everything that we do, we present on that platform, which is hung off that digital asset. So you can go right down to module level, and that gives you a point in time record of what we've captured, but also it's a repeatable, auditable method by which you can go back to that particular asset, or an area of the site, or a string, or a transformer, or an inverter. You can look at the whole history of what you've looked at. Particularly for electroluminescence, it's quite exciting for us, because if you plot successive years, you can actually see, rather than sending that solar panel away to be accelerated tested, you can actually see it in real time. You can see the deterioration of the solar panel as it's aging.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. I mean, it is you've just you've just given us a different perspective of there's a whole lot of historical data and all of checks that the TA has done, that specialist companies like yourselves they do, or the data that the drones capture, and all of that up until very recently, they were not consolidated on single platforms. But now we see platforms like the one that above has, as you've mentioned, that they are solving this kind of situation, but also having systems like this for the asset owners and for the asset managers provide a further level of if you would like, of insight into the park itself, so you can make then decisions based on information, and you can compare, and you can audit, and obviously down the line, if the asset changes hands, these sort of data points that are captured, they offer higher valuation over the sell, let's say.
Absolutely.
Be very mindful of the time, John, and time flies when you have very interesting discussions. Um, Allow me a question that I would like you to, be very kind of on the spot and brief.
Okay.
And going back into your startup situation, I would like you to give me very briefly your lowest and highest moments over the last year. And if there's one lesson that you can say to someone that's starting now, perhaps even with this difficult situation with COVID, which we haven't touched yet, what would that be?
We recently won a FSB Startup Business of the Year for Wales, so we were really pleased with that, and really chuffed, like any accolade, really.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So I haven't really showed it off yet. It's just sat over there, and no one's been in the office for a few weeks. But that's probably my high. That was a nice thing to achieve. In terms of the low, we've had a real tough time over the last 2 or 3 months with one particular contract, and without going into too much detail, I think it sort of flows into the lessons learned, really, where working for much larger businesses in my past, you only do what your job is to do. So everyone else worries about finance, admin, insurance, PAYE, and all of the other bits that protect the business. And being a business owner, you've very quickly got to get up to speed. And the haste to win contracts, unfortunately, in this particular occasion, was greater than the sort of calm and steady and sensible thinking that I should have deployed. So not only in making sure you've got suitable insurance for everything that you do, and don't trust insurance brokers in that regard. They are not experts in business, and you really need to make sure you're covered. We had quite a nasty theft, which we suffered a financial loss because we didn't have suitable cover, but also in contracting and subcontractors in particular, and making sure that your boilerplate contracts are watertight and you get it done early. Just make sure that both are covered fairly, and we've got some clawback if things go wrong. Hope that wasn't too waffly.
No, absolutely. Just reaching the end. If we could close with with a bit of a positivity, perhaps, how do you see the future of solar PV and perhaps battery storage as well in the UK? And what do you think the new norm would look like? And what do you look forward to as 2 degrees Kelvin?
I think it is a positive outlook for solar to start with over 5 gigawatts of large-scale solar in the development pipeline. You don't know how much of that's going to go forward, but that's a real positive move, particularly in these subsidy-free times. Battery storage is a different situation. It's much more complex, with all of the revenue stacking that you need to put in place for these short-term contracts with DNOs and grid. It is difficult. It's much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the co-location of solar and battery storage does need to move on a little bit. But I like the idea of using battery storage for not necessarily these advanced services that, you know, sub-second frequency response and all of this sort of thing, but more power shifting. So actually taking the energy when it's not needed and putting it to where it is needed. So, and that goes from utility scale all the way down to residential. So I think it will come on. And also not only lithium ion, but different chemistries, you know, vanadium redox flow batteries and things for extended periods, up to 8 or 12 hours of energy generation, compared to lithium ion, which is sort of topping out at around 2 unless you overload it. So there's different chemistries, and there's also different technologies coming on board, not just chemical batteries, but gravitational potential energy. You've got energy vaults, you've got gravitricity, all of these amazing novel energy storage ideas and concepts, which are going to come through the conception and development and start to be put into at least pilot plants, but if not, utility demonstration plants. So solar and battery storage for me is still a fantastic opportunity. I've also got an eye on hydrogen, and the EV market is accelerating away. Excuse the pun, but I think lithium ion is leading the way there. But there's going to be huge challenges with concern to connectability around an island such as the UK, or isles like the UK. And I think hydrogen has a real role to play, and in particular green hydrogen. So if you can make hydrogen green, there are some massive efficiency challenges to overcome, but that can really fill the gap between automotive, you know, mainstream, and agricultural, industrial, and commercial large vehicles and planes and trains and things like that. So I think there's also something to do with hydrogen generation as well, that power generation, I mean, that's quite interesting as well. And that's the sort of thing that we want to get ourselves into. We want to become a green tech, climate change mitigation idea development company that comes up with these solutions and launches new divisions and products to the world. So that's where I see ourselves going. We want to walk before we run. So we're going to concentrate on the solar for the next couple of years and plant some seeds and see where they go. But we've got quite a lot of exciting partnerships coming up this year, not only with world-leading technology providers, but on the academic front as well, and doing some Innovate UK type collaborative academic projects as well with Cardiff University and the likes, to try and develop some niche and unique and innovative technologies going forward. So
excellent.
A positive outlook. Yeah.
Positive outlook and innovation and reinvention, perhaps in these difficult times, uncertain times. Excellent, John. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Look forward to see you in person.
Thanks. Nice. Thanks for having me. You've had yes.